All right, welcome back to our next lesson in U.S. wars. We're going to be focusing on Southern Europe and North Africa. This is kind of two different areas, just so you know. Well, definitely two different areas, but they do go together, though. Like, one affects the other in many ways. Like, because through the course of this lesson, you'll notice we'll start in Southern Europe. We'll move into what happens in North Africa, and then back into Southern Europe. It kind of goes back and forth. So in a way, I could treat these as two separate lessons, but in many ways, it actually would. It's good to put it in one lesson, so that's why I'm going to be treating it. Now, the picture you're seeing there, by the way, that's the Italian army you're looking at with one of the Italian symbols in the background, or flag. The Italian flag in the background. Sorry, because we're going to be talking a lot about Italy in this one. Kind of give Italy their just due, although. If you know much about the Italian army or kind of things go around about it, they're not known as like the greatest fighters in World War II. You know, in some ways I'm going to, not, how would I say it? In some ways you're going to say like, it seems that way, but I'm also going to show you in many ways that's not necessarily true either. So, moving on. First off, we need to talk about what is going on in Europe at the time. So, up to this point, we have talked about, at least on the European theater, that World War II started with the invasion of Poland. Russia also invaded Poland. Then Germany then attacked Denmark and Norway, then the Low Countries of Netherlands and Belgium, and then it took over France as well, essentially talking about mostly Western Europe. They took over Western Europe. Well, countries you're looking at there, hopefully in that map, that he doesn't have control just yet during that time period is countries like Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, and Greece. You know, it's kind of like just this eyesore on the map to the Nazis and to Hitler. It's like, well, we can't let that go. Now, one of the countries, Romania, namely, was very happy to join the Axis powers. Their dictator was quite fascist himself. He looked up to people like Hitler and Mussolini, so it was just Romania easily joined in, and that was a huge thing for the Germans and the Italians because they needed the oil from Romania. To this day, Romania is still the major source of oil in Europe. But you can't just have Hungary sitting there. So Hitler gives an ultimatum. Hungary says, you will join or else. And Hitler's like, okay, we'll join. Bulgaria kind of got an ultimatum, but they were kind of happy to join too because now they're seeing that Germany and Italy are winning this one. Maybe this time they will be joining the right side because they were on the Central Power side in World War I as well, and they lost. And maybe it'll be different this time. Oh, excuse me. But Bulgaria joins in. So that leaves Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was actually given the ultimatum too, is like you join or else, and they join, but then their government gets overthrown like a week later or so, and that government doesn't respond to Hitler. Now we think, as far as what I know, it's believed that they were going to just say, okay, we'll join you, but they never gave word back, and Hitler just didn't want to take time with it, so he says, all right, just take it over. So he invades Yugoslavia. This is known as part of the April War. And you see their map in the bottom, just how Germany and Italy, and even some Hungarian forces invade Yugoslavia, and it's a pretty quick deal. On the right-hand side, by the way, you have a Yugoslav national, basically rebel fighter, who is captured by the Germans, and he's being put to death right there. If you can't tell, he's being hung. Thing is that he is yelling "death to fascists" at the top of his lungs right as he's about to get hung. Just something to point out about that picture that I learned. But the reason why I kind of show that picture and tell that story is the people of Yugoslavia, they don't, you don't like this happening to you. They become incredibly militant. In fact, the most militant resistance against Nazi and German rule in World War II comes in Yugoslavia. You know, we hear a lot of stories about the Netherlands and Belgium and France and the underground resistances there, which were like a lot of good stories to tell there. But Yugoslavia is where you have full-on rebel armies in the tens of thousands walking around the hills and forests, trying to fight off and kill as many Germans as they can, kill as many of the Axis soldiers as they can. And it just, a lot of them get killed too. It's a lot of death in Yugoslavia through the course of World War II, basically. That's kind of how that starts. But with that, the Axis powers have controlled pretty much everything except for Greece. Now, this is where we're going to focus more on Italy at this point. By the way, I chose that picture of Mussolini on purpose. But basically, Mussolini's getting jealous of Hitler. The Germans have really done all the conquering. He's just kind of had a backseat to everything. Yet, if you remember talking about the rise of dictators lesson a while back, Mussolini was the first dictator, really. He came in the 1920s. He started this whole fascism thing way early. He is the guy that everybody looked to as this great leader, blah, blah, blah. And now it seems like he's not in the limelight anymore. He's taken a back seat. So he wants to show that he can get victories just like the Germans can. And he also has this big dream of reinstituting the Roman Empire, a new Roman Empire. By the way, that picture in the bottom right, and so when I found this, so it says is that was a scale model of ancient Rome that he had in his home, that he'd love to go down and look at. I would love to have that. I mean, you want to talk about things I'm really jealous of? I would love to have a scale model of ancient Rome, of the city of ancient Rome, in my basement as well. I'm pretty jealous of that. But he had this because he'd look at it and he just dreamed of a new Roman Empire with him at the head. He'd be the new emperor of the Roman Empire type thing. So, kind of start off on that. One of the areas that was a major part of the ancient Roman Empire was Greece. Now, Italy already controlled Albania. Let me go back to this slide really quick. Notice how Albania right here is the same color as the Axis powers. It's because Italy actually took over Albania in the 1930s. It's one of the things that was an appeasement issue that I did not talk about earlier, where Italy invades Albania and the world does nothing about it. Well, Albania is in a great position to invade Greece from, so that is what Mussolini does. So this is just a close-up picture of Albania versus Greece. And so Italy attacks and, well, the outnumbered and outgunned Greek army beats the crap out of the Italian army. It was quite the embarrassment. So when the Germans hear about this, when Hitler hears about this, he's like, oh, really? And so he has to divert a portion of his army that was supposed to help out in Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of Russia later on that year, down to Greece to help out, and he is able to conquer Greece in a matter of weeks. You know, the Italians kind of help out as well, but mainly because of the Germans being there, they conquer Greece in a matter of weeks. Now, because Greece gets attacked by Italy, by the way, Greece becomes one of the Allied powers and joins Britain in fighting against the Axis. So Britain actually sends a bunch of soldiers up there to help, but it was a little bit too little too late, and they just all get overrun. Now they retreat down to this island down here, the island of Crete. You know, what part of the Greek army and the British army that can get down there. And that's a good position to have, because if you have command of the airfields in Crete, your long-range bombers potentially could reach the Romanian oil fields. And that would really harm the German war machine. Hitler can't have that, so he needs to invade Greece. Now, in the invasion of Greece, the way you want to do it is you want to do it through, not invasion of Greece. In the invasion of Crete, you want to do this in the way where, hey, we can land troops, so you need to have a superior navy. Now, just so happens Italy has technically the superior navy in the Mediterranean. Mussolini, for a decade, had been working on building up a big new navy. So, and he leads up, the British know this, and they're like, okay, we got to neutralize that. So they essentially ambush the Italian navy with airplanes, mostly off of aircraft, or with their main aircraft carrier in the region, and they do so much damage to the Italian navy. Like, those ships on the top are actually the Italian battleships getting hit pretty hard in what's called the Battle of Taranto. You know, the Italians get beat so badly that they just kind of go back into port and they never come back, meaning that Axis shipping lanes in the Mediterranean are now under threat to the British Navy. So the Germans had to divert a bunch of submarines they needed to attack British convoys in the Atlantic Ocean down to the Mediterranean to deal with protecting their own convoys down the Mediterranean. You know, it's, again, if you're kind of getting the idea, it's like Hitler's like, again, like, seriously, Mussolini, why can't you just do something right? So in comes the invasion of Crete. So they don't have the navy to do this, so they use, again, something that worked really well in the invasion of Norway. That is paratroopers. And the plan is drop paratroopers into Crete, take over some of the airfields, and then fly in more soldiers and more equipment. And that way you don't necessarily need the Navy there. So that's what they do. And you see an actual picture. I don't know if that's a picture of the actual invasion of Crete, but that is a picture of German paratroopers, Nazi paratroopers. I'm going to put it there. It's successful, but it's disastrous at the same time. The Germans are able to get a foothold in Crete, but they lose so many paratroopers that Hitler is very reticent from doing this ever again, from invading, using paratroopers in this sort of invasion ever again. By the way, we're not. The U.S. and Britain later on, especially after during D-Day and afterwards, we rely heavily on paratroopers in the latter part of World War II. So, anyways, but that, by the way, that picture you're seeing there is a picture of the invasion of Crete. Those are German planes and German paratroopers coming down. Now, switching gears. So essentially we have this idea that the Germans keep coming to bail out the Italians. It's going to be no different here. And notice I keep using the term Italian blunders up there. For you Italians out there, I'm sorry. Yes, there are definitely stories of heroism and things like that, but in the overall general look at things, didn't do too well. So the map I'm showing you there is not the best map, but what I'm trying to show you is a little bit of idea that everything in the dark blue, this is areas that Italy has control of in Africa. All of this right here is what Britain has control of in Africa. And later on, Britain gets control of this too. This map is like a pre-World War I map, actually. And then in the 1930s, Italy actually takes over Ethiopia. So basically the Italians are here, British here, most of British oil is right here. So Mussolini sees the idea like, I have a 4-1 advantage against the British in this area. They are being hard pressed by the Germans, especially in the Battle of Britain, where they can't send down enough men and supplies. You know, my hundreds of thousands will definitely beat their tens of thousands here. So he attacks from two different routes. And just long story short here, it just doesn't go well for the Italians. The British come down and they beat the invading force coming up this way and cause them to surrender. Then they turn around. The British then turn around, come up here, face the Italians coming this way, beat them all the way back to Tunisia. It is just an embarrassment for the Italian army. And they have something like over 100,000 of their men captured in this whole thing. So, by the way, that is a picture of captured Italians on the bottom right hand there at this time in the beginning of the Battle of North Africa. So what happens? Germany has to come and help out. And this is what we call the beginning of the North Africa campaign, at least when Germany gets involved. Even though it's kind of started already with Italy, but that was just so quick and such a disaster. Yeah. Anyways, in comes one of the most famous people of World War II, Erwin Rommel. He's already proved himself to be a very capable military commander in the war against France. And Hitler has a lot of trust in him. So he sends them down there with it was like 20,000, 30,000 German troops total. Again, troops that were supposed to go in for the invasion of Russia, but had to be sent down to help out in Africa. He sends them down there, combines his Germans in with the Italian forces still there. And this is where, especially if you're Italian, saying, it wasn't the idea that Italians are crappy soldiers, because they're not. They really just didn't have good leaders. Because once you get German military leadership in there, these Italian soldiers turn into some of the best soldiers of World War II. And the combined Axis forces here of Germans and Italians become known as the Desert Rats. You know, you just can't get rid of them. They're just there all the time. That's from the British perspective, by the way, and from also the British perspective, they give the nickname to Rommel of the Desert Fox. That's not a put down, actually. They're just saying this guy is tough and he's smart and he's getting us. He keeps beating us when it seems like we should be able to beat him. He's outfoxing us, essentially. So, and Rommel does just that. He pushes back across this map down here, pushes back across all North Africa. Has a major battle here in Tobruk. The British try to hold out there pretty good, but in the end still go down, and forces them all the way into Egypt to a place called El Alamein. And this is where Rommel's luck starts to run out a little bit, mainly because, and I really shouldn't say luck, just logistics start going against him. Because his supply lines are coming across all of this, British airplanes and later on American airplanes, when we get into the war, are able to attack his supply lines, basically keeping him from getting the oil he needs to keep pushing forward. So, and at the same time, because of later on Americans coming in and the British kind of getting all their supply lines in, the British actually start building up a lot more troops than the Germans have. It used to be the Germans and Italians had more, it was the Italians had more, then the British had more, and the Germans came in, it was kind of even, but now the British definitely have more. But the British just keep getting beat over and over again by Rommel until you get a guy named General Bernard Montgomery. He takes over at El Alamein. Is able to kind of face off Rommel in the standstill. But the standstill is really there because Rommel just isn't getting the supplies he needs. But Rommel realizes pretty quickly that if he doesn't do something soon, this is all going to be for naught. It's going to be a bad deal. So he realizes he has to attack sooner than later, and he realizes he's not going to win this unless he's willing to take a major risk. And he does take a major risk. Now, by the way, the setup of the Battle of El Alamein is off there on the left. Basically, look at all the German or Italian, I should say, with German flags in there. And on here, you do have, I say the British Army, but it's made up of a lot of different peoples. You have the Australians, New Zealanders, Indians there, all part of the British Empire at the time. Yes, but you also still have free Greek troops fighting and free French troops fighting down there. See the Greek flag right here and the French flag right there. All this kind of like allied army, this unified allied army against the Axis powers there at El Alamein. Now, this map here is showing actually what happens. So, to explain this as quickly and as best as I can, what happens here is that the British expected the Germans to try to punch through, say, right here or right here with their tanks. And so they put all their defenses and anti-tanks and landmines and tank mines mostly all in this area. They don't do it down here because, rightfully so, their intelligence told them the Germans did not have enough oil to really make a good push down there. So the British actually put a lot of their backup armored divisions here ready for a counterattack when the time came for when they knew Rommel was going to attack. Instead, Rommel gets military intelligence himself saying that the British had a supply depot right here. Like there's a nice little flag right there. I don't know if you can tell there in the video, but that's the target. If the German tanks could take that, they could refuel with the British's own petrol, with their own oil, and then keep going and come around the back end of the main part of the British Army and win this battle. This really was a close run battle because the German tanks the Germans launched an attack up here first. Just keep the British there and their focus there. Then they launched all their armored divisions down this way as close to the Qatar depressions they get. Qatar depression is basically just endless sand that you can't get through with any type of vehicles, unless you got a bunch of doom buggies, basically. But they come down this way as close as they can to the Qatar depression, hit these guys who are not expecting to see any German tanks, and they're taken completely by surprise. If you notice, the arrows are just like, and we're out of here. So we're done. They just get run over. They get up here and they run over all the armored divisions up here. Like this is looking like it's going to be a disaster for the British. They get to the point where they're about to run out of fuel. The Germans are at the point of running out. Some of their tanks have already run out of fuel. They hit the oil depot just to find out there's no oil there. Now, from what I understand, this was just one of those acts of almost providence. Don't know where the order comes from. Pretty sure it didn't come from Montgomery, the way I've read a lot of stories on this. But someone got the order to move the oil back over here. And so it was just like two days before the battle, a day to 2 days before the battle, they were in the process and they'd actually just moved the oil depot over here. In fact, even a lot of the British didn't know that. Like, the British commanders thought it was all right there. So, like, the German intelligence was good. It just, something happened to the oil wasn't there. And the German army just stops. Or the German tank attack just stops because they have no more oil. The picture in the bottom right here is just showing this where a stalled German tank is surrendering to Australian troops because they can't do much else. They're dead in the water. So, and this is how the British are able to counterattack at this point. You see this part here, the second armored They hit the German armor pretty hard, and since the Germans couldn't move too well, they were kind of sitting ducks. The British put up really good staunch defense right here. Like the Germans put a little bit more effort up there once they realized the tank attack wasn't going to, just in case the tank attack didn't work out so well. But the British put up a very good defense there, and all in all, the British were able to basically, through luck and willpower, they're able to actually stop Rommel for the first time. So Rommel's in trouble. He has to back off, but then he has to really back off because here comes the Americans. There's actually a combined American and British attack called something called the Operation Torch. We're on the west side of North Africa. They land all along the coastline and form up to just kind of attack the Germans and the Italians from the west. So you have Montgomery pushing in from the east, from Egypt, pushing Rommel back. And then you have the Americans under the command of General George S. Patton pushing in from the west. And the idea was to squeeze Rommel and the Germans out of Africa completely, which they eventually do. Not without some hiccups. I'm putting this page in here because this is definitely more from the American side. We have our first, you could say our first major battle. I think this is our first major battle in World War II. And it is a complete loss on our part. Our untried troops get beat pretty badly here. Notice the overturned tank just up against the experienced troops of the Germans, and the Germans do kind of launch a bit of a surprise attack against us there. It's called the Battle of Kasserine Pass. We learn from it. Patton comes back from this, has another battle against the Germans in what's called the Battle of, I think you pronounce that Gutter? Anyway, Gutter. And we win this one soundly. Although for the egos of the generals, by the way, Rommel's like, oh, we wouldn't have lost that one if I was there. He actually was on leave for the 3 days that battle took place. Pretty much kind of flipped Patton off saying, you didn't really beat me. Anyways, you can read up on that one. The egos of these three generals, Rommel, Patton, and Montgomery, it's just downright hilarious in World War II. And I say that word a little bit from definitely presentation mindset because their egos, we're talking about lots of people dying, of course, in these battles, but the way their egos are drawn into this, it's interesting. So, but this map is essentially showing just how the Germans are getting squeezed out of North Africa, the British pushing from the east and the Americans in from the west, and they do get squeezed out, which leads into how this goes. So if you notice, I said earlier this would be from like Southern Europe to Africa, back to Southern Europe. So we're in Southern Europe, came to Africa. Now this is the part where we get pushed back into Southern Europe. But we don't get pushed to like Crete or Greece. We get pushed into Sicily. Now, Allies are looking to invade Italy. And the gateway to Italy is really you have to take the island of Sicily on the southern part of it. Before I bring that up, basically, the first thing I want to talk about is something called Operation Mincemeat. Operation Mincemeat is where the Allies actually successfully trick Germany into thinking that the invasion is actually going to come onto an island called Sardinia, off to the west of Italy, not Sicily, which is south of Italy. They do this by just having a dead British guy, changing his identity, like his cards, changing it all in like the British and American records, who this guy is, and put a bunch of plans on him for the invasion of Sardinia. And they place him in a place where the Germans find him, and they find all these plans on him, and they look up his background and figure out that these plans must be legit for who he is, and they think and set up all their defenses in a way where they think that Sardinia is going to be the one attacked. And really where it's actually going to be Sicily. And it really made it a lot easier for the British and Americans to invade, to more easily invade and conquer Sicily. So anyways, if you want to read up on Operation Mincemeat, it's kind of one of those crazy stories of World War II people like to talk about. Now, in the invasion of Sicily, both Patton and Montgomery come up with their own plans. First off, here's Patton's plan. Patton's plan was have the British land here at Pozzallo and Syracuse and push their way up to Messina. Patton would land right here at Licata, push up to Palermo, and cut across to Messina, that way kind of pincering and pushing the German and Italian armies just straight off the island. Montgomery's idea was a little bit different. Yes, Montgomery says, yes, I'm going to land at Pozzallo and Syracuse, but Patton should land at essentially anywhere between Gela down to Pozzallo here, and then watch my flank. Make sure I can get to Messina, and he can just guard my left flank there. And in the end, a guy who we have not talked about yet, but you definitely need to know who this is, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, later President of the United States after World War II. He's the overall Supreme Allied Commander, so who do Patton and Montgomery give their ideas to, and who has to sign off on it? Eisenhower. Eisenhower decides to go with Monty's plan. Not because it was necessarily better, but because it really came down to politics. Kind of give the British their due. They're the ones that have been suffering the most, so in this case, if both plans seem like they might work, we'll just go with Monty's plan. Patton is livid. He knows his plan's better, so he does his plan anyways. So he still follows what he's supposed to. He doesn't completely go off and not do what he's ordered to do, but he splits his army up. He gives just enough troops to one of his subordinate generals, a guy named Omar Bradley, a very famous American general as well of World War II. And Bradley lands here. If you're noticing this map here, this is the actual invasion map. Bradley lands here, and he does watch the British flank right here. Montgomery does land here the way he planned to and pushes up towards Messina, but Patton lands here at Licata and pushes up to Palermo and goes across. And so instead of coming down on Patton and saying, you're supposed to do what you want, and replacing him, Eisenhower is like, well, it's kind of working. He's kind of following orders. And this is kind of drumming up a bit of a good-spirited competition back home between the British citizens and American citizens. Whose general is going to get to Messina first? And in the newspapers, this is called the race to Messina. Who's going to get there, Patton or Montgomery? Patton or Montgomery? And it turns out that Patton got there 5 hours before Montgomery did. So he wins the race to Messina. Did Patton and Montgomery like each other? No, they did not. Not at all. So, anyways. Thing is I'm skipping over so much right here. I go into so much more detail in class on this one. I'm going to skip it over. Just know that there was an incident there. Actually, let me go back to this. There was an incident there that happened on his push towards Messina, Patton's push towards Messina, where he slaps a soldier. And when the American moms, just moms in general in the U.S., hear about how he treated this soldier, they get so ticked off that it eventually leads to him getting fired because of public opinion here in the United States. But looking back on this, you're like, what are you doing? This is one of your best generals. Yeah, he's a jerk, but he gets things done. That's kind of what you need in war. But because of that public pressure, the president told Eisenhower, can him. Now, he doesn't get fired like sent home fired or in prison fired. It's just the idea he's not given a battlefield command anymore. He does get a battlefield command later on after D-Day. And I'll explain more about that later. But just know that of all the generals that the Allies had, of all the Allies, I shouldn't say Allies, not including Russian generals, but between Americans and British and Polish generals and stuff like that, Patton was the one that the Germans were the most afraid of from our side, from our Allied side. They were always watching where he was and where he might be, or when the Americans would put him back in command, because how could we be so stupid not to use one of our best generals? Anyways, just to put that a little bit in there. But he does get canned after this. So he's not there when we do invade Italy. Right after we take Messina and essentially capture the island of Sicily, then the Allies launch an offensive against all of Italy itself. I am skipping so much here, and I apologize for this. Two reasons. One is that I actually just didn't have time to get the PowerPoint a little bit more done out further and explain better. And secondly, I knew this would take a lot more time. We're already pushing almost a half hour for this lesson. So I'll just explain a few things very simply, and then we'll be done. Basically, Americans and British attack. They push up to about right here fairly easily, but then get stopped at what's called the Gustav Line. And we get held there pretty good. The Germans put up a very spirited defense. It's at this point that the Italian citizens themselves aren't too happy with being an Axis power any longer. Mussolini's led them to defeat after defeat after defeat. They were having to rely on the Germans to kind of win battles. And now it seems like Germany is taking over their country and really telling everybody what to do, which is really what was happening. And they just kind of had enough of it. And so they're at the point of switching sides. And once the Americans and British do break past the Gustav Line, a big rebellion rises up in Rome, actually. Mussolini is deposed. A new government is put in place, a government which leaves the Axis powers and subsequently declares war on Germany. So Italy actually switches sides in 1943 and joins the Allies. Mussolini, I put a very small picture of this up here because it is actually quite a gruesome picture, and it's just showing the backside, so you're not really seeing how bad it is. But Mussolini is beaten to a bloody pulp along with his mistress and a few other guys from his government that were blamed for this debacle that was the new Roman Empire, you could say. But yeah, if you Google that, there's some pretty ugly pictures up there of just how badly he is beaten to death. So, but to continue on with things, we have an almost failed invasion of what's called the invasion of Anzio. The Americans landed Anzio, and we almost get pushed off. That almost was a huge disaster on our parts, and the Germans almost get us. I'll let you look that one up if you want to later. But eventually, after Anzio and others, we push the Germans all the way up to what is called the Gothic Line. And only at the very, very end of the war do we push past that because Germany is just falling apart at that point. But they hold us pretty good there for a good little bit. But that is essentially the invasion of Southern Europe and the conquest of Italy, and then what is now termed the liberation of Italy, because they do join our side in 1943. Anyways, I'm going to leave it at that. This will be one of your lessons for this week on basically the war in Southern Europe and North Africa. If there's anything here that interested you that you want to know more about, I encourage you to look it up. That being said, I'll see you in the next lesson.